You can walk into almost any liquor store right now, grab a bottle of Scotch for $25, and have a perfectly fine evening. Smooth enough to sip, decent enough to share, nothing to complain about. But then there is the bottle behind the locked glass case, the one with the wooden box and the wax seal and the price tag that looks like a mortgage payment. $2,500 for whiskey. So what exactly happens between that $25 bottle and that $2,500 one? Is the expensive stuff really 100 times better, or are you just paying for a fancy box and a good story? Let's break it down. Number 1. What $25 actually gets you? At this price, you're almost certainly looking at a blended Scotch whiskey. That means a mix of grain whiskey and malt whiskey from multiple distilleries across Scotland, married together in large batches. Brands like Teacher's Highland Cream and Bell's Original are the workhorses of this category. They are built for consistency. Every bottle tastes the same whether you buy it in Glasgow or Tokyo. The grain whiskey in these blends is produced in massive column stills, which churn out spirit quickly and efficiently. It is lighter, less complex, and much cheaper to make. The malt whiskey blended in adds character, but at this price point, you are not getting a lot of it. Think of it like a cocktail, where the cheap mixer does most of the heavy lifting. The master blender's job here is to hide flaws, not to showcase brilliance. Young, rough spirit gets smoothed out by blending dozens of components together until nothing sticks out. It will not blow your mind, but it will not offend you either. And honestly, in a highball with soda and a lemon peel, a $25 blend does exactly what it needs to do. That said, some $25 bottles punch well above their weight. Copper Dog is a blended malt made from 8 Speyside single malts. No grain whiskey at all. At around $30, it embarrasses bottles twice its price. Number 2. The grain versus malt divide. This is where the price starts climbing. Single malt Scotch by law must come from one distillery and be made entirely from malted barley in copper pot stills. Those pot stills are slow, inefficient, and beautiful. They produce spirit with more body, more flavour, and more of the oily richness that whiskey lovers chase. Grain whiskey, on the other hand, runs through industrial column stills that operate continuously, like a factory assembly line. The output is cleaner but far less interesting. A single malt at $50 to $70 already puts you in a completely different world from that $25 blend. The jump in quality here is probably the biggest you will experience on the entire price ladder. Number 3. The age statement game. When a bottle says 12 years old, it means the youngest whiskey inside spent at least 12 years aging in oak casks in a Scottish warehouse. Every year that spirit sits in wood, some of it evaporates. Distillers call this the angel's share, and in Scotland, it runs about 2% per year. Do the math on an 18-year-old Scotch. Nearly a third of the original liquid is gone, just evaporated into the Highland air. The distillery has been storing, insuring, and losing product for almost 2 decades before it sees a single penny. That cost gets passed straight to you. This is also why the no-age statement trend has exploded. Distilleries like Bruichladdich and Ball Blair release bottles without an age on the label, which means they can use younger whiskey and still charge premium prices. Some of these are genuinely excellent. Others are a convenient way to sell young whiskey at old whiskey prices. Number 4. The barrel factor. If age is the engine of Scotch pricing, the barrel is the steering wheel. A brand new sherry-seasoned cask from a cooperage in Jerez, Spain can cost over $1,000 each. A first-fill bourbon barrel from Kentucky runs about $200. And the type of wood touching your whiskey matters more than almost any other variable in the entire process. First-fill casks dump massive flavour into the whiskey. Vanilla, toffee, dried fruit, baking spice. By the 3rd or 4th fill, the wood is mostly spent. It still ages the whiskey, but the flavour contribution drops off a cliff. Some distilleries get creative here, finishing their whiskey in port pipes from Portugal, rum casks from the Caribbean, or even red wine barriques from Burgundy. Each one leaves a different fingerprint on the final spirit. Premium bottles like Tamdhu 15 or Edredauer 12 use exclusively sherry casks from Jerez, and that wood selection alone accounts for a huge chunk of their price tag. When you see a bottle bragging about its cask program, that is not marketing fluff. The cask genuinely contributes up to 70% of the final flavor. At the top end, single cask releases let you taste the personality of one individual barrel, which is why two bottles from the same distillery, same age, can taste completely different. Number 5. The production scale reality. The Glenord distillery in the Scottish Highlands produces around 12 million litres of spirit annually. Sold globally as the Singleton, they have massive operations, international distribution, and economies of scale that keep prices reasonable. A 12-year-old Singleton of Glenord sits comfortably around $40 to $50. Now compare that to Kilherman on the Isle of Islay. They are one of the smallest distilleries in Scotland, producing a tiny fraction of what the big players make. Every bottle is essentially craft production. Their limited releases can hit $200 or more, not because the whiskey is necessarily better, but because there is simply less of it. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover the real story behind what you drink every week. Now let's talk about where things get really interesting. Number 6, the marketing and packaging markup. This is where the gap between what is in the bottle and what is on the price tag starts getting uncomfortable. Pick up a bottle of Royal Salute 21. It is a fine whiskey, smooth, approachable, and well made. But a huge percentage of that $200 price tag is paying for the brand name, the ornate porcelain flagon, and decades of advertising steeped in ceremony and prestige. At the ultra-premium end, you are buying crystal decanters, hand-stitched leather presentation cases, and certificates of authenticity printed on paper that probably costs more than most bottles of wine. Glenturret, Scotland's oldest working distillery, has released bottles in crystal decanters by French glassmaker Lalique priced at £80,000 each. The whiskey inside is excellent, but you could argue that half the price is for the container it came in. Number 7. The collector and auction economy. Once you cross the $1,000 mark, you are leaving the world of whiskey drinkers and entering the world of whiskey investors. In 2015, an independent bottler released a 75-year-old Mortlach distilled in 1939 into just 100 crystal decanters. It was the oldest single malt Scotch ever released. Scotch from so-called ghost distilleries, places like Dallas Dew, which closed in 1983 and sat as a museum for decades, now commands prices that would make art dealers blush. A bottle that cost £40 in the 90s can fetch thousands today, simply because no more will ever be made. The secondary market has created a feedback loop where scarcity drives price, and price creates perceived prestige, which drives more scarcity. Some of these bottles will never be opened. They will sit in temperature-controlled storage like gold bars, appreciating in value while the actual whiskey inside slowly, quietly, does nothing. Auction houses like Sotheby's and Bonhams now run dedicated whiskey auctions multiple times a year. Rare Whiskey 101, an index that tracks the secondary market, has shown consistent returns that outperform the stock market over certain periods. That has attracted a wave of people who could not tell you the difference between Islay and Speyside, but can tell you exactly what a 1972 Capadonic sold for last quarter. A $2,500 bottle of Scotch sits right at the border of this world. You might get an exceptional 40-year-old single cask release that genuinely delivers a once-in-a-lifetime drinking experience. Or you might get a beautifully packaged bottle riding a hype wave with whiskey that tastes about the same as something at $300. Number 8. The blind tasting truth. Here's what happens when you line up Scotch from every price range and taste them without knowing which is which. Experienced tasters can consistently tell the difference between a $25 blend and a $75 single malt. That jump is real and obvious. Between $75 and $200, trained palates still pick up meaningful differences in complexity and depth. The whiskey gets richer, longer on the finish, more layered. But somewhere between $200 and $500, the curve flattens out hard. Above $500, you are mostly paying for rarity, age, collectability, and story, not necessarily for a better experience in the glass. Multiple blind tasting studies have shown that even seasoned whiskey judges struggle to rank bottles by price once you are in the upper tiers. The sweet spot for most whiskey lovers sits between $60 and $150. That is where you get genuinely world-class single malts, properly aged, matured in quality casks without paying for crystal decanters or auction house markup. Bottles like Craig Ellachie 13, Deanston 12, or Glen Scotia 15 live in this range, and any one of them would hold its own against bottles 5 times the price. So is that $2,500 bottle worth it? If you are a collector chasing rarity, maybe. If you are celebrating something truly monumental and the experience matters as much as the liquid, perhaps. But if you just want an incredible glass of Scotch on a Tuesday evening, your best bet is to walk right past the locked cabinet and grab the $100 bottle on the middle shelf. That is the real secret the Scotch industry would rather you not figure out. The difference between good and great is real. The difference between great and obscenely expensive is mostly story, packaging, and bragging rights. If you want to know which bottles actually deliver the best value for the money, subscribe so you do not miss it.